Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Holly and I am going to be talking about all 6 books that I read in January. Okay, so like I said, I read 6 books and that was 2,456 pages. I did audiobook 1 book. I physically have 1 book, and then the other 4 I read on my Kindle. I read 1 fantasy, 2 romance, 1 thriller, and 2 science fiction. So kind of all over the place, but I do feel like those are the genres that I gravitate towards the most. So without further ado, let's jump into them. The first book that I read this month was The Songbird and the Heart of Stone by Carissa Broadbent. This is book 3 in her Crowns of Neoxia series, and we are now following a completely different character and storyline than the first 2. So I think, if I recall correctly, there's going to be 6 books total in addition to some novellas in between, but there are going to be 6 books, and you're following like 2 books are 1 character set, 2 books are these current characters, and then 2 books are different characters. But basically, if you don't know what this series is, it is set in a world that has vampires, and the first 2 books are following this human girl in the vampire world, and she has to enter these trials in order to have a wish granted, and it's very high stakes, very fun read. This new book it actually came out, I want to say in November, and the next book is already set to come out either, I think maybe in August or again in November. I'll have to fact check that, but I'm pretty sure the next book is already set to come out this year. So in this book, you are following one of like the main character's best friends. I don't want to give it away in case you haven't read the first 2 books, but we're following this character, and I honestly had no idea what to expect. I didn't even know that that's the character that we were following, but I ended up giving this book like a 3 stars. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't to the level that the first 2 books were. So in this book, it just felt like we went even more high stakes, but at the same time, it didn't feel high stakes. So there are all of these huge dangerous tasks that these characters have to go through, but it's like we never got a break from how dangerous and how high stakes it was. So as I was reading, it was all like none of it felt important anymore because everything was important. So I felt like that kind of worked against the book because I knew that I was supposed to be worried about the characters, but the entire book was just the same level of tension and the same level, like there was no up and down at all. It was just all high stakes, which made nothing feel high stakes. So I'm going to continue the series, but I was a little bit disappointed with this one. I can't lie to you. I also thought that the main character was a little insane. Like the decisions that she was making, both like high stakes and low stakes decisions. Just like every single decision she made, I was like, why are we doing this? Why are you making this decision? This doesn't make any sense. You're dumb. Like she never really learned her lesson at all. It was just like she just kept making the same mistakes, wasn't really learning, and it was just really frustrating, and it made it hard for me to root for her because I was like, girly, what are you doing? But it wasn't as bad as some other books that I've read. So like I said, I still gave it 3 stars. If you've started this series or this series sounds interesting to you, definitely read it because I've had a lot of fun with it. I just really had, I guess, higher expectations for this book than what was delivered. The next book that I read was the audiobook that I listened to, The Flight of the Eisenstein by James Swallow. This is a science fiction fantasy set in the Warhammer world. So if you, like me, know nothing about Warhammer, basically it's this like game that's been around since the 70s, I think. And it's set in like a futuristic, grim, dark world where, you know, we have mastered space exploration and humankind is set off on this crusade to find every single planet that's inhabited by humans and basically just bring them back into the empire of man. So that's very interesting. And they're also like, if they encounter any alien species, kill them. So very violent, but these books, I never would have thought I loved them as much as I do. This is book 4 in the Horus Heresy series, which is kind of like the 30K. I feel like I'm going really in depth on just the build-up and background of this book, but I honestly can't talk about the contents of this book really at all because it would be spoilers for what happens in the first 3 books. But I will say that this series, I don't even know if I can call it a series, but there's 55 books, okay? And tell me why I'm like ready to read all 55. Like every single one of these books has been above a 4-star for me. The first 3 were all 5 stars. I talked about them in my tier ranking books that I read in 2024. I am obsessed with this world and these characters and these stories. Like they are so good. If you are a fan of science fiction, military fantasy, political, anything, like it's so good. I'm trying to think of something that it's similar to, but it's just so unique and I'm obsessed. 5 stars. So good. This book got like 4.5 because it was so good, but it just wasn't at the level of those first 3. Like if you know what Warhammer is, if you have someone in your life that knows what Warhammer is and you want to impress them or like bond over it with them, I highly recommend you read these books. Like I am fully invested now and that's something that I never thought was going to happen. So all of that to say, The Flight of the Eisenstein was amazing. The next book that I read I do own, and it was The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. Loved this book. This was our book club pick for the month of January. And if you have been following along with any of my videos, you know that our book club picks have been really bad. Like none of us have liked any of the books so far, but this month we picked a winner. We picked a winner. Everyone gave this book like 4+ stars. We were all so happy with it. It's written beautifully. This book is about this girl or woman who works in the publishing sector in New York, and she inherits her aunt's apartment. And this apartment has magic in it. And if you're not into fantasy or magic, it's not like fantasy really at all. But in this book or in this apartment, sometimes you will end up going back in time or forward in time 7 years, the 7-year slip. So I absolutely loved the characters in this book, and I loved that element of whimsy, and there's a romance in it that's incredibly sweet that I found like really realistic and believable, and I just loved watching them grow. The minor characters in this book really stand out in a way that makes it feel like an interconnected standalone series. If you know what I mean, you know. Because like there are times when I'm reading like a romance that is interconnected standalone and I catch these characters and I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that character. I hope they get a book. And then the next book is about that character. That is how this felt. Like this is not interconnected standalone. This is just by itself. But the characters in this book were so important and so realistic, and they really shone, and I just loved them so much, and I kind of want to be friends with all of them. But I gave this book 4.5 stars. I mean, it was phenomenal, and it is so much more than just a whimsical, magical romance. It talks about grief and finding out who you are and accepting that people change and you can change. And I mean, it is just So good. I highly recommend y'all check out the 7-Year Slip if you haven't already. The next book I read on my Kindle, I actually got it from Libby, and it was The Ministry of Time by Kayleigh Bradley. I have been looking forward to this book for months, like months. I have wanted to read this book. It is science fiction, and the kind of premise of this book is that the British government has uncovered a way, like the technology to be able to bring people across time. So like time travel. So what they did is they went back in time and basically rescued people right before they died in their timeline and brought them to present day Britain. And the main character is what they call a bridge. So her job is to basically live with one of these, what do they call them? Patriots? No, what do they call them? Refugees? I don't remember what they call them, but her job is to live with one of these people from the past and kind of catch them up on everything present day. Great premise. I heard amazing things about this book, but I spent the entire time being so confused. Like, so confused. Now, I am not the smartest person in any given room, but I also think that I'm like pretty capable of understanding things, especially given how much I read. Like, I understand things pretty well. I was so confused in this book, like absolutely just lost, because I think the main issue for me was the writing style. I found the writing style to be almost charming because it was very, very, very dialogue heavy, which I loved, but the author doesn't really use dialogue tags, so it's really hard to know who's talking. You'll just see like dialogue and then another dialogue, then dialogue. Like there's no he said, she said, nothing. So sometimes it's obvious based on context, but sometimes they're like starting a conversation and I'm like, I don't know who's saying what. Or if there's multiple people in a conversation, no clue. No clue who said what, okay? Which it's a little confusing at times. And then she also, within the dialogue, it's almost as if she didn't want to break up the dialogue with action at all, really. So instead of saying, oh, they were talking and the character started messing with my bike. So I said, stop ringing my bell on my bike. Instead of saying that, it was just straight dialogue. How's the weather? Oh, it's nice and sunny. That's really good. Stop ringing my bell. So it was like listening to a conversation without being able to see what's going on. And I feel like that was not the best example that I could have given, but it's the one that I like remember the most, because I was just like, oh, like it almost works. It almost works. And I think if it was less frequent, it would have worked, but it was like every single conversation was like that, and it was just so confusing. And then they talk about like all the characters, they have names, except for the main character. You never learn the main character's name, but everyone else has names. But then if they're from the past, they use their name and the year that they're from interchangeably. So they would say like I don't remember any of the characters, but they might call her Susan Miller, but they also might call her 1847. So that was really, really hard to keep track of who was who. And at one point I just gave up until I finally, like, just from repetition, realized who was who. So that was all very frustrating, but the banter was really good. The main male character, who was from the past, extremely dry wit. It was so entertaining to read all of his like little quips and his jokes that he was making, because not only was he British, but he's like old British, so it was very, very humorous, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. But the book also tried to do a lot, and I think maybe bit off more than it could chew, because it was very obviously, the book was wanting to draw a parallel between these time travelers and modern day immigrants or people who are like forcibly removed from their homes. So that aspect was there. And she also talked a lot about just like systemic racism and the little microaggressions that people of color face. And I felt like she just dabbled in a lot of different ideas and never really sold me on any of them, if that makes sense. Like, I was very intrigued by a lot of the topics. It was like she was opening the can, but then never serving it, if that makes any sense. But overall, I mean, I don't get it. I don't get the hype. I really wanted to get it. Last thing I'm going to say about it is I think it's a very bold choice, okay, to make your main male character a real human being who lived in the past. He's a real person, real, okay? So it's not historical fiction. She didn't just like make up people who could have lived in that time. They're real people. I just think it's a bold choice to choose a real life person who existed and died in the past and write about him and include a semi-explicit sex scene with him. I just think that's a bold choice. I don't know how comfortable I would feel if 300, 200 years in the future, someone wrote a book about me and gave me characteristics that I may or may not actually have and then wrote a sex scene about me. Like, that's, I don't know, just made me a little bit uncomfortable once I realized he was a real person, because I didn't know that going into it. But once I learned it, it just felt very, very icky. I think I've said way too much about this book. I spent way too much time on it. But overall, I do believe that I ended up giving it maybe 2.5 or 3 stars. I don't really know. Even now, I don't really know what my rating is. I gave it 3 on Goodreads, but I might even give it, like, I'd probably give it a 2.5 or a 3. I don't know. I'm so conflicted because I'm still so confused, and the end is so bizarre and so confusing. Anyway, I said I was done talking about it. I'm done talking about it. Moving on. Next, we have another book that I read through Libby on my Kindle, which was 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. This is a young adult thriller that takes place in one night, which I love, and it is all taking place in an RV that's like broken down on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, which I also love. I feel like with any thrillers, it is just, the stakes are upped so much if they can't leave and it's all taking place very, very quickly, like within a set span of time, like there's that deadline on it. So it was, I mean, I read it in one day, pretty much one sitting. I just read it, I sat down and I read the whole thing. It was so good. The premise is we have these, I think 6 teenagers and early 20s people in this RV on their way to go camping for spring break. But they end up getting lost and their RV breaks down, they can't leave, and then they find out that there's someone that is trying to kill them and needs one person to come forward because they have a secret. But they don't say who it is and they don't say what the secret is. So everyone in that RV is on incredible edge. Like, it is tense because you don't know who it is. You don't know what these people want to know. So the tension, the stakes are so high. I was sweating as I read it. Like, it was crazy. It is young adult thriller, so the end was kind of bizarre, but I was willing to suspend disbelief for this book because I just thought it was really good. If you want something that is going to have you stay up to the middle of the night to finish it, you should read 5 Survive. It was really good. I think I gave it 4 stars. And the final book that I read and finished in January was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. The funny thing about this is part of an interconnected standalone series that I have actually read every other book in this series except for the first one, which is this one. So a couple years ago, I think I read Yours Truly, which is the second book. And then this past summer, what was it? Just for the Summer came out, and that's the third book. So then this book came up on Kindle Unlimited and I realized I had never read it. So I went back and read it, and it was really cool to see all the characters that I've already known their stories and their endings and everything, and getting like introduced to them for the first time. So it was pretty funny, but this book was very cute. I also finished it very quickly, pretty much in like 2 or 3 different sittings. I stayed up until 2:30 in the morning to finish it because I just had to know what was happening. I was giggling and kicking my feet at parts, and I just love the way that Abby Jimenez writes. The summary, without getting too much in detail, Alexis is a doctor from a very long line of established doctors who all like leave their mark and they continue on this legacy. She is the next in this line of like world-changing doctors. And she meets this guy from this small town who is also from a long line of influential people in his small town. Both of them go back like 125 years. And with him, there's always been a member of his family as the mayor in this small town. So he is very prominent and rooted in his town. She is very prominent and rooted in her hospital. They're not close to each other. They're like 2 or 3 hours apart. Of course, they meet and try very hard not to fall in love. It is so good. And it's so much more than just this love story of, you know, these two people who couldn't be more different, just realizing how well they work together, because she is also recovering from an abusive relationship and realizing all of the ways that her life and who she is as a person has been impacted and molded from honestly a very young age. And the way that Abby Jimenez deals with trauma and abuse and grief is very real, very realistic, and it's obviously written from a point of love. Like, I can tell that Abby Jimenez did her research and she genuinely cares for these characters who I'm sure she gets a lot of inspiration from real people in her life. And you can tell that she is really wanting to kind of spread awareness, but at the same time just like reach out to all of the people who've been in situations like these and just let them know that they're not alone. And I can feel the love coming off the page from the author to the reader, as well as these main characters. Overall, I just think it's so wonderfully written and I loved it. It was a cute rom-com. The banter is incredible. Of course, everything, you know, it's kind of Hallmarky, but I love that. I read so many like heavy books this month and I just needed something quick, palate cleanser, and that's exactly what this was. And I ate it up. I know Abby Jimenez is coming out with another book in this Interconnected Standalone this year, I think April, Say You'll Remember Me, and I am very much looking forward to that one as well. That is all of the books that I read this month. It was a really good reading month for me. I'm excited to see if I can kind of keep that up because 6 books is pretty impressive. Now, I was sick for a week, so 2 of these books I read while I was sick. I am just very excited to continue reading and continue falling in love with characters and stories and finding new authors. So as always, if any of you have any suggestions for books that I should add to my TBR or be on the lookout for, please let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so that I can see you in the next one. Bye.